This is Zettelcast, brought to you by readers, writers, thinkers, and teachers from Lillipub, along with our partners in thought, our Zettelkastens. In this show, we share discoveries that our Zettelkastens have shown us.
There you go.
And compare notes on how we're using this marvelous invention in our creative work. Thank you for joining us.
All right, Book.
Let's do it again.
All right.
Episode 24, Innovation and Inspiration.
All right, well, welcome to the Zettelcast. I am Mel Jeffcoat, and I'm hosting this session. And my first challenge to everybody this week was to choose something that we wanted to do with our Zettelkasten, but we had not yet done. Some new idea, a new way of putting in cards, a new way of organizing, a different kind of card. It could be anything, just as long as it was something that we hadn't tried, but we've been wanting to. In addition to, at this point, we've just started. So in about another month or so, when I'm hosting again, we'll do a little recap and see how it's going and if the things that we've tried have grown or if they've just sort of faded away. So who would like to go first?
Oh, okay. I'll go. All righty. So I'm going to have to use my down-facing camera because I got to work with Zeke here. Zeke says hi. Okay. So this is Zeke, my Zettelkasten. And recently I had to move my author box to the back of Zeke because he was sharing a box with my index, and the index was just getting too big. Plus, my project has to do with my author box, which was going to grow it. So I had to put it, share a space with my workbox. So this is my workbox where I pull cards to work on. Especially this is all my Zettelkasten book. So now what I'm going to show you about is in this back section, which is my author box, where my author box moved to. And I have been wanting for a long time, and I went down the road a fair distance and failed with the idea of creating a title index. So my first attempt at creating a title index turned out to be totally disastrous. It was
Book title index?
I wanted a book title index,
Okay.
and I went overboard on it. What I ended up doing for my title index was creating not just a title index, but I included the author names in it. And that turned out to be completely unworkable because it was just getting too fat and too repetitive. And it was just becoming clunky beyond belief and just miserable to work with. So I abandoned the whole idea. Then Mel got me going again. And I thought, okay, I wanted to have this title index. So how could I make it work? And I realized that, in point of fact, I really like my author cards the way they are. I like the fact that I've got names and I can put all of my authors in one place and actually find all of the works that I've got for that author on one card. And that's all I need for the author. So really what I need for my title index is just titles. And that's where I went wrong on my first try. So I'm trying again, and you can see from where I've got this little card, I'm only just scratching the surface because we only just got the assignment to go for it. And so now I'm doing my alphabetical cards. I've made out A to Z, and I'm collecting just the titles. And I'm underlining the first letter of the keywords of the title and listing them alphabetically along with the nickname for the book. And that is my new attempt.
So you are going by the keyword, like I see the artist's way that is under A. Would it also be under W in your
would.
system? Okay.
It would, but it would not be under T.
Right. Interesting.
So in fact, way, it should be under W already because I've done that one. Sure enough, there's the artist's way, and along with the timeless way of building. Now, as a matter of fact, I've got two ways and two words. As soon as I get to three, like any other index, it will get promoted to a card of its own. And right now, although it's in its own space right now, I think my plan will be to distribute them through the letters of the alphabet at the front, and then just let the author names go to the back. But that's easy to change my mind about if I decide that doesn't work. So thank you very much, Mel, for getting me to try again and to actually work out a system that I think is going to function this time.
Cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I already had an author and title index in my bibliography box, but I just indexed by the first major word. You know, not Aran or the. Yeah, I didn't index by any other words in the title. So it's interesting. I might consider doing the more tagline approach like you're doing.
Well, just using the title as though it were a tagline.
Exactly. Yeah. And indexing each of the keywords.
Yeah.
Well, mine I have sort of talked about before, and so it's not a new innovation that I'm creating above and beyond the fact that I already started doing this. So, and one of our Lily Pub regular listeners, Bev, happened to ask me a question about it recently. It was like, what is it that you say that you do with books? So I will, so I'll share my down-facing camera, and I'm basically handling indexing titles from bib cards in a different way. And I'm going to show it kind of in situ to show why it is that I'm already thinking that I like it for me. So there we go. All right, what we're looking at is from my index, the word build. And it had been used 3 or more times, and so it got promoted to its own card. And what I did in order to kind of prepare for this Zettelcast is I just went through my index looking for the cards that had in the index that had been promoted, because that indicates, well, there's stuff going on there, more than one-offs, right? And so what we've got here is the word build, and it's got 2 bib cards indexed and 1 story card from Roanoke. And so what I'm doing here, Kathleen, is I am incorporating into my main index 2 things that you don't. Right? Because I think you said that you have started separating your story stuff into its own thing, and you haven't been indexing your bib cards. But the reason I'm indexing my bib cards, just to reiterate, it's because my reading list is crazy big. And so when the question comes up, all right, I finished this book, what book should I read next? I'm looking for Nadia Z to have a suggestion. And I thought, well, maybe the suggestion would be, here's a conversation that a book is offering to participate in, if you'd only read it, Julianne. All right, so what's happening here, and then having just pulled this word build, I'm already seeing for the story something I hadn't thought of, right? So the story, not quite time-honored building tradition leads to discovery. So the not quite time-honored building tradition I'm referring to is the tradition that comes from the timeless way of building, that the ancestors of Lydia have decided, let's do this all the time. If you read The Timeless Way of Building, he talks about, he goes through different ways. One is a very small way where he says, here's how I created a little cottage in my back of my house. And he talks about the way that he did that. And then he talks about expanding that into how do you, if you've got, let's say, a family compound, how would they expand? Or a little village, how do they expand? And so that time, not quite time-honored building tradition, I'm imagining that the ancestors of Roanoke kind of set out a way for the future people who live there. Here, do this when you need to build more space for yourselves. And I'm imagining, not that I have figured this out yet, but I'm imagining that kind of like the game of telephone, right? The current generation have sort of lost the plot of that whole tradition. But in the scene, and this is really not a spoiler because I'm anticipating that this scene is going to happen right at the beginning of the book. Not that I've written it yet, because I'm already intimidated by it, but I'll get there. So that they have lost the plot, they have not done it right, but somebody knows, hey, here's how this actually ought to be. And it ends up leading to some kind of discovery about the ancestors and so on. All right, so the context of having these three on this one card is really illuminating for me because this one is also useful. So let me just point out, I'm not very prepared to present this in a cogent way, but we've got two books. It's easy to tell by the kind of address they have. B. Christopher Alexander, Timeless Way of Building. And this is Eric Raymond, Art of Unix Programming. So I am indexing it with a tagline, a proper tagline. And that is so that I can also incorporate my purpose for reading it in there. So the word built isn't in the Art of Unix Programming, and I didn't actually even include the Art of Unix Programming in there, but I'm just inferring it. And so the fact that Eric Raymond shows how Unix was built to last, and the timeless way of buildings are built to last, and this is all a kind of a nerd geek created planet, there's probably going to be some interesting crossover potential there. So having pulled this, I then pulled the card and I looked at, all right, what were the other keywords for the timeless way of building? And I also pulled the Eric Raymond card. And when I looked at this, it also, it's time and world and Roanoke and so on. And I found some useful, here's the story card also that I'm referring to, the not quite time-honored building tradition leads to discovery. And one thing I'm finding is that the word tradition, this is like a one-off in my index. It only exists here. But in fact, for the story of Roanoke, they're trying to establish traditions. How do you establish traditions from the very outset, right? So how would they have done that? That's led me to a question that I actually hadn't asked myself before today. And then I have all this stuff around time, which leads me to the thing that we talked about Jenna being time blinded by her link. She lives in the present tense. And so I found, and I also found this thing about transition patterns that I think I talked about in a previous episode. Transition patterns in music and how they signal that, hey, we're leaving. Hey, we're just about to leave. Hey, we've arrived. Again, that sort of flow is something that happens in space with the timeless way of building. So the participation of the book in the index is stimulating a whole lot of thoughts for how I'm going to build out that part of the story that hadn't occurred to me before I looked in there. So I'm glad I'm indexing the story, and I'm glad that I'm indexing the books. That it works for my own process because as I contemplate, well, what is the role of stories for me? The role of stories for me is to examine how do you do something and what does it look like when you do it well? That's what every story that I've ever contemplated writing has been about. And so I'm not writing an instruction manual on how to do it, a nonfiction book. I'm exploring it through fiction. So my stories actually belong in the index because they're part of my normal flow.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
You made me very happy that I've only just scratched the surface in indexing my book titles, because now I get to scrap it and do the third version where my index entry for my book title is a proper tagline that includes my purpose for reading the book. But I can't start that until I ponder whether or not I ought to put those entries right smack into my regular index. Ah! You also make me very happy that I had not yet had time to start the process of pulling all of my fiction references out of my main index and creating a separate index for them. I bought the 8.5 by 11 index pages like Victoria uses, but so far they're all blank. And oh my gosh, you're making me rethink.
Well, that's an unexpected result from this. But rethinking is good. So what I did for this project was I've been wanting to expand my project section of my Zettelcast, and pretty much it's just placeholders right now. I've got a section for each work of fiction that I'm working on, and I've got a section for my newsletters and a section for the book that I'm working on. But there's just a few cards in there. And what I wanted to do was to go back through the newsletters that I've already written and start making some connections. And I only got partway through it in this pass. I've gone through most of them and made a note of the resources used in each one. So the books that I referenced, books and articles that I referenced in each one. So now I have that on a card in my working section for each newsletter. And I am not sure if I'm going to do this yet, but I'm contemplating having sort of a master list of the books, the references, and then which letters that they get referenced in, because some of them are in more than one. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. We'll see. But it might be useful as the issues pile up and there are more of them. But I also have a card making note of where my rough drafts are. So the very roughest draft is in a yellow legal pad somewhere. So now I have it written down which pages it is. Granted, will I need to look at that? I don't know. Maybe I'll want to. And I also made a note of the filing cabinet location where I store subsequent typed drafts in a file folder and then the final draft that actually gets mailed out. That all goes in the same folder. So I've made a note of that. Most of my letters have meditations in them that I have shared, and those are usually in different legal pads than the actual draft. So I've made a note of where those can be found. I expect to eventually transfer all of those into the Zettelkasten itself as cards, but that's not there yet. But once I do, then that would be another link. And then I also made a note of my opening story for each issue so that I can keep track of the stories that I've used and not repeat
Oh, I
myself.
told that Roadrunner story already.
Right. Yes. Repeating myself is not an issue right now, but it could be a few years down the line. So uh, that's what I've got so far for each of the issues. I've got a section that's very small right now, but um, sometimes I think of stories. I'm like, that would be a great story to use as an opener, but it's not one that fits what I'm currently writing. Well, rather than forget the story and lose it, I'm trying to make a note of them, at least in rough outline, and then just store it in there. So, maybe a couple months down the line, I'll be going, I need a story. I can look through it, and maybe I already have one figured out.
Will you
And
create
then,
little story cards for those?
whew, I had envisioned pretty much just like a little like synopsis.
Mm.
I don't know that I would need to like write it out full, with all description and everything. I would probably want to do that, when it was time to actually use it, so that I could choose the details that mattered most for the thing it was opening to for. Um, it's possible that I may collect the stories that I have used and make an index of them of these are stories that I've used and maybe I could reuse them in a different context. Um, not again in the newsletter, but perhaps in a book later or if it fit. So yeah, I'm writing so much every month that I want to be able to reuse where appropriate and avoid reusing where it's not, and just be able to follow the breadcrumbs and the trail of how I got there. So yeah, these basic 3 cards of for each letter. The first card is just really doesn't have anything. It's just the title of it, but I could do a synopsis there later, fill that in, and then the resources, and then the drafts, meditations, opening story. That's all on one card. I'm feeling more organized and more in control of the information just with that amount of, you know, cross-linking. So I think it's a good project. I want to continue to expand it.
Was there a moment in the past couple of weeks where you felt I'm too disorganized, there's something I need to do? Or was it anticipating need?
It's at this point it's mostly anticipating need. I don't remember which episode it was several episodes ago where we started talking about something. I don't remember, but that was when I was first going, I really should cross-link my my newsletter issues and everything else that I write back into the Zettelkasten. So that was when the need first appeared in my mind of, this will be useful and I should start it now before things get too big. you know, 10 years down the line, it'd be a really huge project.
Yes.
Kidding. I'm enjoying your newsletter enormously. And one thing I'm finding myself picturing is another book, substantial book from you, where you take all of this content that you're kind of exploring and unfolding. And of course, I get the feeling that you're bringing us along on your exploratory process. Well, it's going to come to the point I just feel where it's all going to make as much sense as it already makes, that it's going to make some larger sense that's going to put the whole thing in context. Are you picturing some major work to come out of this in the form of a separate standalone book?
Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah, it would be obviously more concise than the newsletters because I will know um, where I'm going at that point and be able to choose the details that matter. We're kind of throwing all the spaghetti at the wall right now and seeing what sticks. So, the subscribers get to go along on the journey, and there's a lot that won't end up in the book, of course. The book is for more of a general audience, like people who missed out on being on subscribing to it. They shouldn't miss out on the information. So I definitely want to get it out there in a more accessible format, a year or two down the line. And The subject is so vast. I could see many books coming out of it as long as I stay interested. Um, there's so many different facets.
Well, I know I, for one, appreciate the once a month pace because
Mhm,
it lets me really explore in detail the concepts that you cover in that one issue. Whereas if I had the whole book, I
mhm,
might just read through them and nod my head and say, yeah, that's nice. Whereas I'm Julianne, you brought up a couple of questions with that we should add to Adler's list.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I'm trying to do that with the material that I read now. Can I talk you into sharing
Absolutely.
this?
Sure. Yeah. So Kathleen, first of all, and I'll link to this, Kathleen has a brilliant new series that she is doing where she is uh, using Adler's How to Read a Book as guidelines for how to read a book, and she's adding and Zettelkasten, that book. And you've done 3 episodes so far, I think. 4. Oh, I've missed today's. Cool. And the so that inspired me to go back and actually read Adler's book because I'd really only skimmed it. I'd started a bib card, it hadn't gotten that far, and so I got into the analytical reading where it's a really once you get to the last stage of analytical reading, you're basically setting yourself up to be somebody who could go poke the author on the shoulder and say, hey, I disagree with your book, and here's why. Or I really agree with your book, and here's why. You have to show, in order to disagree, you have to first really demonstrate that you understand it to the best of your ability, right? And sometimes a book, like the book that Mel has already written, Turn the Page, will require that you try something. And Kathleen, your book is definitely going to say, all right, get your cards out, darn you, and do this. And Victoria's book that she's writing is going to require you do some stuff. And so that's a behavior change. You're not just changing your understanding and engaging with it intellectually. Certain kinds of books require that you do things. And so he has questions when you're engaging with it analytically to kind of prove to yourself that you get it. And if getting it involves doing something, how does the author, well, what is it that the author expects you to do? And how does the author persuade you to do it?
And what balance of time?
And what balance of time? Some books, it's like, wow, it's going to take me ages to read this book. It's going to take you 2 ages to read the book and do all the things that the book says to do. And you need to know that going in. And if you don't know that going in, you might do what Kathleen, you were just saying, which is, yeah, I get it. As you're paging through, and you will have not gotten the book because it needs to be experiential. So not all books are like that, but a lot of them are. A lot of them say, I urge you to put the book down right now and do this. And if
And,
and what is that? And how often is that supposed to happen? How long does it take?
and that's why I like the newsletter approach so much, because the newsletter comes out and it's all very intriguing. It's all exciting. And I want to read this. I want to do this. I want to do this. And you got to wait another whole month for the next one to come out. Well, there's all your time. You've got the opportunity to do the things. You've got the opportunity to compare, make the comparisons, to think about the terms, to look at. I love these trios that we're always looking at with your stuff, Mel. And I'm always trying to make them into. I always want to turn them into fours. Which one has an opposite that they just don't? I'm always convinced you can turn them into 4, but you can't. Anyway, that's an aside. But the fact that you really can interact with it. And to me, that's enormously exciting. Of course, though, in your book, you really get to do stuff.
Crafts.
So thank you, Mel.
And Kathleen, your newsletter involves a lot of activity too.
Mhm.
Is
Yes.
you share a lot of stories, and then there's like, okay, write your own. So anyway, I mean, Adler's questions that you need to be able to answer in order to get to the point where you could tap the author on the shoulder and have a debate. It's pretty much, what's the author trying to say? And how effectively did the author say it? And you need to be able to say it just about as well as the author does at the end of it, in your own words. If you're only repeating the words that the author said, then it's suspicious.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, we've all read books where the author makes a key point, and then in defense of his key point, he just restates it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, when are you going to prove it?
Yeah.
And by identifying some of those key propositions, oops, spoiler alert, we're not there yet in our series. You get to figure out whether the author actually does try to defend their point.
Yeah. Yep.
I ran into that a little bit. I've just started reading Aristotle. Uh, so he's actually really readable, at least what I've read so far. Categories is the one that I've read. Uh, and it's all very interesting, very relevant. You'll see it in the next issue. Um, but one thing that I don't talk about is there's this whole section where he makes these arguments that sort of undermine what he's already made. He says these things work this way, and then he says, well, here's examples where it doesn't work this way. And but I was just like yelling at him in my mind. I'm like, no, it does work. You just need to look at it this way. And your counterexample is not a counterexample because you're messing up what you're looking at. It feels a little bit presumptuous to be yelling at Aristotle, but here we are.
I mean, Adler points out that sometimes you have the benefit of later research and later
Yeah.
discoveries.
And
Yeah.
and the book is like this thick, and it's not even the complete works of Aristotle. And I've read 20 pages of it for this one work. He could deal with this later in some other work, but just from what I've read so far, I like was frantically writing on my bib card of he's neglecting to look at this.
Well, it's great.
And maybe he's setting you up.
Maybe not in this. I finished this volume or this work, but perhaps in a later one or a different one. I don't know. Could be. But well, this has been very interesting. We still have a little bit of time, so the second question that I had for us was, where do we find our inspiration? Do you go looking for it, or do you just let it come to you? Or, if you do both, which do you do more? So inspiration, where does it come from?
For me, it just comes. But the pattern in which it comes generally goes very well with Zettelkasten. And that is because I get very inspired by either the ability to make use of one thing in two different contexts, or the ability to translate something from one milieu, medium, way of it being to another. So what I just pointed out with building, right? Combining the art of Unix programming And the timeless way of building, that is the sort of thing that really inspires me. Is that, when Kathleen, you talk about that's for me what is like, oh, I can see the parallels. And there and the sum is greater, the feeling that the sum is going to be greater than the parts. And those things just come. And if you have a mind where you're kind of already thinking along those lines, you see more and more and more and more of them. So that's just been a habit of my mind my whole career. Uh, uh, in software started out that way. And then just looking back, it keeps on, every idea I've had for software has been, oh, I can take this thing and I can reuse it this other way. 2 for 1. And so that's where my inspiration comes from. And I don't even really need to look very hard or intentionally. Where can this be used for that? I just look at the one problem, and the other solution that is similar kind of just comes up.
Well, I have some of that going on too. I love my Zettelkasten for that same reason. And a lot of times those connections that just light my brain up and give me tons of energy feel more like promises than fulfillment. It's like the feeling that, my gosh, this could develop into something really, really interesting. And it doesn't always come about, but it's so tantalizing. And for me, the most fun of all comes about when there's one over here that's just not quite, and there's one over here that's just not quite, and then pretty soon, but if you put them together, and light bulbs flash, and it's within the Zettelkasten that I get my greatest bursts of creativity and energy. But it happens away from the Zettelkasten as well, because once I'm attuned to it, and once I'm starting to capture it, I see it around me more and more and more. And hanging around this group opens me up because I'm around people, the two of you, and also Deb and also Victoria, who aren't with us today, but everyone has such a different and unique approach to the Zettelkasten that it's like, oh, I never thought of that. I could do that. And every time I open myself up to a new way of being with my Zettelkasten, I get a cascade of inspirations. So I would have to say that being with Zeke and being with you guys, that's where I get my inspiration.
Well, I'm going to continue the theme of saying, yeah, it's mostly serendipitous for me. Um, have either of you ever read the Lloyd Alexander children's books, the Prydain Chronicles? I loved them when I was a kid, but I, I'll just briefly describe it. There's a foundling, a young boy who's found as a baby. Um, Heron is his name, but in one of the books, it's basically a coming of age story for him. He goes out wandering to try and find his family, where he came from, because there's absolutely no record of it. And this is in a sort of a medieval Welsh sort of setting, magical. But he goes out and he meets up with various families that he spends time with, and sort of learns how they do their thing. But then there's always a reason like this isn't quite right, and he moves on to find something else. But one of the families that he stays with is this really spontaneous, joyful family. They live by a river, and everything that they get, the river brings to them. Everything that they need. They've got a weir to sort of a net across the river, and whatever ends up in the weir that day, they're making use of it somehow. Maybe a chicken floats down the stream and now they've got dinner. And there might be some weird piece of metal that then they turn into a tool. Whatever they find, they use, and they're just joyful for whatever comes to them. So I do that with ideas. That's how I approach. I've got my nets out, I've got my questions that I'm thinking about, and I read lots of different things. I wander around and look at different things, and sometimes, bam, something ends up in my net. And it's like, oh, that is such a cool idea. It fits in with something else that I was thinking about. And, once you get the starting point, for me, then I find more inspiration by chasing it down. Like, where does it lead? What does it connect to? So in that sense, it's not spontaneous. It is directed, but the initial inspiration often is very serendipitous. Just happen to walk into a bookstore and say, "Oh, that title looks interesting," or who knows how it can come. So yeah.
I was thinking about in the initial assignment, enhance your Zettelkasten in some way. I was thinking of all these different ways, and it was really the idea was trying to expose the connections that are nascent in there. And being a technologist, I thought, well, maybe there's a digital way that I could do this, or maybe there's a way that I could be keeping like a living mind map or something. The living mind map maybe could work, but the digital thing, one, I've got Scott Shepherd's voice in my head, so I don't want to be a bubble graph boy. But having not actually just tried to explore for conversations that are nascent any other way first, why I'm not going to automate something that I haven't done manually. Right. And so the fact that I was able to just start with my index, again, I'm kind of doing the question I said, if you had somebody else's Zettelkasten, how would you explore it in order to find out what's in there? And I'm doing it with my own because my own is more than a year old. I'm different and I'll find things. And so I just started looking through the index, and I'm very glad that I have added tabs to the cards that are showing up as main topics, because it made spelunking through there just at this first level quicker. And just to see what's in here. And some of the cards are almost entirely story related, but they've got one little something in there that is general knowledge or a book that could add to it. And it's not like my index is so big that I won't benefit from just letting my fingers do the walking and taking the time. Because if the bubble graph had shown me, hey, Art of Unix Programming and The Timeless Way of Building, they both use the word build in your tagline. Would it have jumped out at me in the same way? I don't know. Possibly no.
Well, we've had a really wonderful conversation today. So where could people go if they would like to participate in more conversations with us or learn more?
You can come to lilypub.org, and we've got several ways now that you can participate in the conversation. If you join us at lilypub.org and you become a member, you have the Roanoke group where you can actually see what's happening as we go along and contribute your thoughts and ideas. We have the Circle for Zettelkasten, where you can explore the Zettelkasten. And guess what? Starting this week, we have 2 new office hour calls where you can pop in and ask any questions that you might have about your Zettelkasten. It's not a scheduled presentation. It's just a time when you can jump in and join us. You can find us in the Circle for Zettelkasten. Look for the events tabs. There's one on Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific and another on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. But if you come over to the events tab, you'll see it in your own time zone. So you can see if you want to join us. And if that all seems still a little too much for you, you can still go over to lilypub.org and sign up to be on the mailing list for all things Roanoke, and we'll share with you a link where you can find postings that we make as we go along. So one way or another, we hope you'll consider joining us.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Yes.
Victoria wanted me to let you know that she's still planning to be our leader next week.
Excellent.
Very good. Thank
And
you.
Mel, if you don't already have a title, you'll let me know the title for this week.
I will.
Fabulous.